Visit the Comic Book University.
Or you'll face my pen instead.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another information-packed action-adventure class at the Comic Book University. Guys, Professor Bill here, about to continue your education on the Ghost Rider. Now, we went over the origin of the original Ghost Rider. Now we move over to Marvel Comics. Timely at the time. Why? Well, because Dick Ayers came over. Now, Dick Ayers is a legendary artist. Again, just died in 2014. He came over to Marvel Comics, started doing a lot of work. You'll see him on a lot of the original stuff. He was, again, one of those guys who would have to learn the Marvel way of doing things. He started drawing over top of Jack Kirby templates, did all these different things. Mostly did inking at first, and then started working on drawing also. If you ever find any of the old interviews, video interviews by him, very humble guy. You know, went to art school and all that stuff, and says about how art school just didn't teach him what he really needed to learn, and he would learn things as he was going all the time. Even just his commentary on how he learned how to clean his inking brush, and how it took forever for him to even realize that you use a brush for inking, not the little calligraphy pen. So, yeah, very humble guy, very nice guy. Really wish I could have met him. But things being what they were, he came over and did some work. Now, by pre-70s, the Comics Code Authority had relaxed a lot. Not enough. It didn't disappear, but again, probably necessary, and it wouldn't have invoked that sort of creativity that the artists and writers had at that time. There wouldn't have been that challenge of trying to find out what can go through the Comics Authority. So, that being what it was, ghosts were now allowed back in, and all sorts of things like that. Eventually, the Dracula's Tomb of Horrors comics would come out, and all sorts of amazing, really cool, scary horror fest sorts of comics like that would start to rear their ugly head. The things that really made Marvel famous to begin with back in the Timely days. So here we are, February 1967. Ghost Rider #1 is released to the world under the Timely imprint. Now, Dick Ayers was drawing, but you had Roy Thomas and Gary Friedrich doing the story. We didn't use the same character, per se. We didn't use Rex Fury. Instead, we used a character called Carter Slade. Now, some of you guys might be all happy and giggity and going, I remember the Nick Cage movie, the first one, the Ghost Rider movie, where Carter Slade was actually the caretaker of that strange graveyard. And that's not actual Marvel canon. That's just a movie that Fox made, and no. Carter Slade did not have a horse that caught on fire. He did not catch on fire. That never happened. It was a great idea. You know, it was for people like me who knew the original Ghost Rider comics before there was the Flaming Skull guy. That was actually very cool that they made him a standard Ghost Rider. The spirits of vengeance, you know, were a part of him also. Good stuff. I enjoyed it. But it's not canon. It's not actually in the Marvel Comics. So Carter Slade was pretty much exactly like Rex Fury. They were able to make an entire comic of him now, and it only lasted 7 issues, but at the very least they were able to give him a proper origin story, not some rushed thing. And Marvel always had the intention that they're not just making this for kids. They made the comics easy for kids to understand, but they also made it interesting for adults also, which was one of the things that put Marvel on the map and made them a strong contender. They didn't talk to kids like they were kids, and they also talked to adults. So they put out Ghost Rider #1. So Carter Slade is this guy who is essentially a school teacher and lives in Ohio, grew up there. His family's still there, and he answers an ad to become a school teacher for a new settlement that just started up in Montana. Now, he goes out there, and on his way, he comes across some banditos. These thugs are out there, and they're shooting up this homestead and massacre everybody. And Carter, being a good Samaritan type, runs up and tries to help, gets himself shot up also. The banditos escape, and they have a purpose. They're actually going around to different homesteads, trying to kill the people so they could buy the property cheap. It's basically just a real estate scheme that involves a lot of blood. One kid from that particular homestead actually was hiding and didn't get caught. His name was Jamie Jacobs. Now, Jamie comes out and he's grieving over his family. Oh my God. But he sees Carter laying there, all sorts of riddled with bullets, but he's breathing. So he figures, I'm going to take this guy to the hospital. But the kid is so disoriented that he actually winds up going the wrong way. And by the time he finally realizes that he's totally lost, and this poor guy, Carter, is probably about to die, comes across a settlement, a Native American settlement, to be proper. Now, there's this medicine man there named Flaming Star, and he decides, yes, he's going to try and help this guy. He helps him out, and after several days of thinking this guy's not going to make it, he suddenly makes a full recovery. Now, this is interesting because Flaming Star actually had a vision, a prophecy. He was out doing a little spirit quest and suddenly saw a meteor, shooting star, fall to the ground. Went, found it, and there's this strange glowing dust inside. Now, this dust is able to amplify the tiniest fraction of light by 1,000 times. Not based in reality, it's a comic book, for crying out loud, but they tried to give something of a scientific explanation for it, and that was it. So takes this dust and he saves it for just a really long time, and had this vision that a foreigner would come and would help to heal the land. And booyah, here comes Carter Slade. And he survived these grievous wounds, so he figures this must be the guy. So he gives him the stardust, tells him about the prophecy, and yeah, that's basically the origin of Carter Slade, Ghost Rider. He is able to track down the bandit guys. He adopts young Jamie as his ward. He was not, thankfully, a sidekick. He did help out, but he wasn't like Ghost Jr. riding along beside him on a little pony or something like that. He wasn't Robin. He wasn't Bucky. He was just a guy who helped him out in the background, behind the scenes. Perfect. So that's basically the origin of Carter Slade. Now, he does very similar thing. He never actually had any powers, just like with Rex before him, and just like all of these versions of the Ghost Riders who come afterwards. And I'm going to start this off right now by saying that the name Ghost Rider didn't stick, because eventually they would make the Flaming Skull motorcycle riding Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider. And when this Ghost Rider came, they said, okay, we're going to call him Ghost Rider, and what do we do with all the other Ghost Riders? Well, you know what? We're going to say that their name was actually the Phantom Rider. Let's do that. And if it would have happened exactly like I said, cool. Unfortunately, they went with a different name first. They tried Night Riders. Now, not Night Riders like Michael Knight, Knight. No. Knight, Night. So, Rider of the Night, Night Rider, he went with that name, Night Rider. Now, the comic book guys, for the most part, are all from the North. And when I say North, I mean like New York North. They don't know anything about the Ku Klux Klan. Like, what do they know about that stuff? People, they exist, and they're horrible racists and just terrible, terrible things. Well, they didn't know that the Ku Klux Klan, one of the nicknames for them was the Night Riders. They didn't know that. So when all of a sudden it was brought to their attention, like, oh, bad. Ixnay on the nay, Eider's Ray. And my pig Latin for the day. We're done. But so he like, okay, Phantom Rider, Phantom Rider. So that's where the name Phantom Rider came from a flub, not realizing and not wanting to be associated at all with that. So they changed the name, but during this time he was called the Ghost Rider. Just when you look him up, either look up Carter Slade or Phantom Rider, and this is how you'll find Carter Slade and his successive generations. Now, again, Carter had no powers, but what he did have was his horse named Banshee. It was a white stallion that they also put the phosphorescent dust on it, put on his clothes, he put on his guns, and the stuff actually stayed. It stayed and essentially like permanently, to my understanding, permanently infused it with the glowing property. So it wasn't just the idea of it being kind of ghost-like. No, he really looked ghostly. So he had the superpower of glowing. Reminds me of Superhero High, also with Kurt Russell. A lot of Kurt Russell in this stuff. Anyway, so he had this permanent glow about his costume. And very similar costume, just drawn a lot better. Dick Ayers learned a lot in the 20 years or so, less than that, but in the years in between him drawing the old Ghost Rider till this particular moment in time. So drawn much better, looks much better, but same kind of concept. He had the reversible cloak. He also had a projector, a little light that he would call the lantern projector, and he could use it in a way, using mirrors or not, that would display an image of himself so that it could confuse people and they could really be shooting at something that wasn't there at all. A little bit better than the idea of, hey, we're just shooting and missing at this guy, even though that was used also. And he would still black out parts of his body to make it look like he was just an apparition and things like that. All of this stuff happened. He also had the Lariat of Night. Now, the Lariat of Night was either a bullwhip or a lasso, depending on how he was using it, that was painted black. That's it. That was the superpower of this particular rope. It was painted black. So the purpose of this was that he could use it and it would look like he was levitating objects, because he would, for the most part, only come out at night, and you couldn't see this Lariat of Night, painted black rope. So he could grab something with it and pull it towards him, and it looked like he was using mystical, ghostly powers to pull it. He could throw things over a rope, throw the rope over top of a branch or something to that effect, and essentially levitate himself like a ghostly apparition. And he would just basically do things like this, and it was all just sleight of hand. He was basically like a stage magician doing things who had a really good shot. And that was the Phantom Rider, the original Ghost Rider for Marvel Comics. Again, they had one of the original creators, so why not? Now, again, the comic line only lasted for the first 7 issues. Real shame. Real shame. But the Ghost Rider still lived on in Western Comics. Now, it was in Western Comics Volume 2, Number 7. That's a 1972 print. He died. It was sad. Legit. Nobody knew it was coming. It was really just unexpected, but they were trying to give rise to this mythos like they'd done with several other characters, Union Jack being one of them, where it's the superhero, the character, this hero himself, is what the legend is. And if the person who is that character dies, someone else simply takes on that mantle and continues doing the exact same thing. So the way he died was his brother, Lincoln Slade, comes off and he is a federal marshal. Go figure. So Lincoln comes out to the Wild West and he's doing his federal marshal thing, and he, surprised, comes across Carter. And he's like, hey, what are you doing out here? And helps to rescue him from a really weird situation. The Ghost Rider, Phantom Rider comes along, and doesn't realize that it's his brother, and both of them go off in a way to go after this bad guy. The bad guy, all the bad guys get killed except for the last guy. He shoots at this beam. They're inside of a cave, and shoots at this beam, causing a cave in. Lincoln is about to be squashed, and Carter leaps up, pushes him out of the way, and gets caught under the rubble. And Lincoln hears a voice within the rubble, moves some of the rocks, pulls off the mask, and it's Carter. I knew I recognized that voice. And he says basically his goodbyes. And yeah, digs him out, pulls off the costume, and he's just terribly sad about this. Just found his long lost brother, and now he's dead in his arms. Really dirty from falling rocks. Jamie, the ward of Carter, decides that the mantle shouldn't die. So at the funeral of Carter, Jamie shows up in full garb of the Ghost Rider. And the sheriff who was after Carter, specifically after the Ghost Rider, he assumed it was Carter. Now all of a sudden he's like, hey, it could have been Carter because the Ghost Rider's here. And he came to pay his respects and all sorts of things, and then rides off. And so Lincoln was a little bit bothered that he did that, but Jamie gave a really great speech where he says that Ghost Rider can't die. Carter died, but the people need the Ghost Rider. So somebody has to take on his mantle. And he's hoping it would have been Lincoln, but if he won't, Jamie will. So Lincoln is off doing his thing, and there's a stagecoach being robbed, and he goes to stop it. Jamie shows up as the Ghost Rider, and just as Lincoln is putting down the last guy, the guy winds up shooting and killing Jamie. So now, for the second time, Jamie is pulling off the costume from this dead person that he knows, and this time he decides to put on the costume. So Lincoln Slade becomes the fourth Ghost Rider total, the third one in Marvel Comics. By the way, this was all in the same issue. So Jamie was the Ghost Rider for all of 6-7 pages max? Yeah, like that. So that's basically how we get to Lincoln Slade. And more on that in the next video. Guys, thanks for showing up. Please subscribe, show some support, show some love. Give me a like, a comment. I respond to them all. And class dismissed.